The sun hung low over the football stadium, casting long shadows across the field as the Friday night crowd buzzed with energy. It was one of those perfect evenings. Clear skies, the smell of hot dogs and popcorn wafting through the air, and thousands of fans decked out in their team's colors, cheering for their heroes. For most people in the stands, it was just another game night. But for Marcus Williams, tonight was anything but ordinary. Standing near the edge of the field, Marcus adjusted the sleeves of his tailored jacket and took a deep breath. The stadium, these people, this team, it all meant something deeply personal to him. The journey to this moment had been anything but easy. He had fought, scraped, and sacrificed to be here. But he wasn't looking for attention or recognition tonight. He just wanted to quietly soak in the fruits of his labor and watch the team he had grown to love take the field. Marcus blended into the crowd effortlessly, not because he wasn't notable, but because he didn't care to draw attention to himself. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a calm demeanor, he carried himself with quiet confidence. His dark skin gleamed under the stadium lights, and his eyes scanned the field, taking in every detail with pride. This wasn't just a football game for him. It was a symbol of everything he'd overcome. But not everyone saw him that way. "Hey you!" a gruff voice barked from behind him. Marcus turned slowly, his expression neutral. A security guard, dressed in a bright yellow jacket, was walking toward him with a stern look on his face. The man's eyes flicked up and down, assessing Marcus like he didn't belong. "You can't be down here," the guard said, gesturing toward the stands. "This area is off-limits to fans." Marcus raised an eyebrow, surprised but not entirely shocked. He had encountered moments like this before, moments where assumptions were made before questions were asked. He opened his mouth to respond, but was cut off before he could get a word out. "Look, I don't know how you got down here, but you need to head back to the seats," the guard continued, his tone growing sharper. A second security guard joined him, nodding in agreement. Marcus remained calm, his hands resting casually in his pockets. "I'm not sure you understand," he began, but the first guard interrupted again, his voice louder this time. "I understand perfectly. You're not supposed to be here. Let's go now." The crowd in the stands was too engrossed in the game to notice the commotion happening near the sidelines, but a few people nearby turned their heads, curiosity piqued. Marcus could feel the weight of their stares, the unspoken judgments forming in their minds. "Is there a problem here?" Another voice chimed in. This one belonged to a young woman holding a clipboard, clearly part of the event staff. She looked between Marcus and the security guards, her brow furrowed. "Yeah, we got someone who's not supposed to be on the field," the first guard said, jerking his thumb toward Marcus. The woman glanced at Marcus, her eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to place him. There was a brief moment of hesitation before she spoke. "Are you sure about that?" she asked, a tone laced with doubt. The guards exchanged looks, clearly not expecting to be questioned. "Look, lady, we're just doing our job," the second guard said defensively. "This guy doesn't have a pass, and he's in a restricted area." Marcus held up his hand, signaling for everyone to pause. His voice was calm but firm as he finally spoke up. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said, his gaze steady. "I'm not just some guy wandering around." "Oh yeah," the first guard shot back, crossing his arms. "Then who are you?" Marcus took a step forward, his posture confident but not confrontational. He locked eyes with the guard and said, "I'm the owner of this team." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, shocking everyone within earshot. The guards froze, their expressions a mix of disbelief and embarrassment. The young woman with the clipboard blinked, her mouth opening slightly as if to say something, but no words came out. Before anyone could respond, a voice crackled over the stadium's loudspeakers, announcing the start of the national anthem. The crowd rose to their feet, and the moment of tension was temporarily drowned out by the sound of thousands of voices singing in unison. Marcus turned his attention back to the field, his expression unreadable. He wasn't angry. He had long since learned to pick his battles, but he wasn't amused either. This wasn't the first time he'd been underestimated, and he doubted it would be the last. As the anthem ended and the game was about to begin, the two security guards exchanged nervous glances, realizing they had made a serious mistake. The young woman with the clipboard stepped closer to Marcus, her voice low but apologetic. "Mr. Williams, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize." Marcus held up a hand to stop her. "It's fine," he said simply, but his tone carried a weight that made her pause. The guard started to stammer out apologies, but Marcus didn't wait to hear them. He turned and walked toward the sidelines, his head held high. The game was starting. And he wasn't about to let this moment overshadow what was supposed to be a celebration of everything he had worked so hard to achieve. But as he took his place near the field, the incident lingered in his mind. It wasn't just about him. It was about something bigger. About the assumptions people make, the barriers that still exist, and the silent battles fought every day by those who refuse to be defined by stereotypes. The game began, the crowd roared, and Marcus stood quietly, watching as the players he had invested so much in took the field. But he knew this wasn't the end of the story, not by a long shot. Little did those security guards know, tonight would become a turning point, not just for Marcus, but for everyone who heard what happened. The stadium lights burned brightly as the game unfolded, players darting across the field with precision and determination. The crowd erupted into cheers and groans with every play, but Marcus barely noticed. He stood at the edge of the action, his mind elsewhere. The security guards had retreated quickly after their mistake, their faces flushed with embarrassment. Yet their stares lingered for a moment longer, as if trying to reconcile the man they had just tried to eject with the fact that he was the owner of the very team they were here to protect. Marcus watched the players, his chest swelling with quiet pride. This team wasn't just a business investment for him, it was personal. He remembered the first time he had seen them play years ago when he was just a kid sitting in the nosebleed seats with his father. Back then, tickets were a luxury his family could barely afford, but his father had scrimped and saved to take him to just one game. That day had ignited a passion for the sport that never left him. But as much as Marcus loved football, his journey to owning the team had been anything but straightforward. He had grown up in one of the roughest neighborhoods in the city, where opportunities were scarce and dreams were often left to wither. His mother worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, and his father, a proud but stubborn man, had spent his days working at a factory that drained his body and spirit. Marcus had learned early on that the world wasn't fair, especially for people who looked like him. He had seen the way teachers overlooked him in class, assuming he wouldn't amount to much. He had heard the whispers when he walked into stores, the unspoken accusations that he didn't belong. But Marcus was determined to prove everyone wrong. Through sheer grit and relentless determination, he had earned a scholarship to a prestigious university where he studied business. While others underestimated him, Marcus thrived, pouring himself into his studies and working multiple part-time jobs to cover what the scholarship didn't. He graduated at the top of his class, but even with his credentials, breaking into the corporate world hadn't been easy. Doors were closed to him that seemed wide open to others. Interviews ended abruptly when his name didn't match the faces they expected. Promotions were handed to less qualified peers. It was frustrating, infuriating even, but Marcus refused to let it stop him. Instead, he started his own company, a tech startup that, against all odds, became wildly successful. With his newfound wealth, Marcus could have moved on to a life of comfort and luxury, but something pulled him back to his roots. He thought of his father, who had passed away before ever seeing his son's success. He thought of the kids in his old neighborhood who still struggled to see a way out. And he thought of the football team he had loved since he was a boy. When the opportunity came to buy the team, Marcus didn't hesitate. It wasn't just about owning a piece of his childhood, it was about creating a legacy. He poured money into the organization, not just to build a winning roster, but to ensure that the team gave back to the community. Scholarships, youth programs, charity events. Marcus made sure the team's success was felt far beyond the stadium walls. But not everyone was happy about his rise. Marcus had faced criticism and skepticism since the day his name was announced as the new owner. Some fans questioned whether he had the experience to run a team. Others made thinly veiled comments about how unusual it was for someone like him to be in such a position of power. He ignored the noise, focusing instead on the work. But moments like tonight, when his presence on his own field was questioned, reminded him that the road ahead was still filled with hurdles. As the game progressed, Marcus's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his phone buzzing in his pocket. He pulled it out and glanced at the screen. It was a text from Sarah, his assistant, who had stayed in the owner's suite for most of the game. "Everything okay down there?" the message read. Marcus smirked. Sarah had been with him since the early days of his startup, and she always seemed to know when something was off. "Fine," he typed back. "Just a little misunderstanding with security. All good now." The reply came almost instantly. "Want me to handle it?" Marcus hesitated for a moment before typing, "No need. Let's just enjoy the game." He slipped the phone back into his pocket and turned his attention to the field. The team was playing well, moving the ball with precision and confidence. Marcus felt a swell of pride. This was what it was all about. giving these players a platform to shine, giving fans a reason to cheer, and giving the community something to rally around. But as he stood there, his thoughts still lingered on the earlier incident. It wasn't just about the guard's mistake, it was about the assumptions that fueled it. He thought about the countless times he had been judged before he even opened his mouth, the way people saw his skin before they saw him. A roar from the crowd snapped Marcus back to the present. One of the players had just scored an incredible touchdown, and the stadium erupted in cheers. Marcus clapped along with the rest of the crowd, his smile genuine. But the moment of joy was short-lived. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed the two security guards standing at the edge of the field, whispering to each other and occasionally glancing in his direction. It was clear they were still uneasy about what had happened. Marcus debated whether to approach them, to explain himself further, or to let it go. He had nothing to prove, but part of him wanted them to understand, not just who he was, but what he represented. Before he could decide, a man in a suit approached him. It was Jeff, the team's general manager, a middle-aged white man with a friendly demeanor who had been one of Marcus's earliest supporters. "Marcus," Jeff said with a smile, extending his hand. "Enjoying the game?" "Always," Marcus replied, shaking his hand. "The team's looking sharp tonight." Jeff nodded, glancing toward the field. "They've been working hard. I think we've got a real shot this season." The conversation shifted to the game, but Marcus could see Jeff's gaze flicker toward the security guards, who were still lingering nearby. "Everything okay?" Jeff asked, lowering his voice. Marcus hesitated for a moment before replying, "Just a little misunderstanding earlier. Nothing I can't handle." Jeff frowned, his expression serious. "If there's an issue, I want to know about it. You shouldn't have to deal with that kind of thing, not here." Marcus appreciated the sentiment, but he shook his head. "It's fine, Jeff. Let's just focus on the game." But as the night wore on, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this incident was part of a larger story, one that wasn't just about him, but about the barriers that still existed, even in places meant to bring people together. The game continued, the crowd cheering louder with every play. But for Marcus, the real battle wasn't on the field. It was in the hearts and minds of the people who still couldn't see past their own biases. And as he stood there, watching his team fight for victory, he knew his fight was far from over. Marcus lingered at the edge of the field, the cheers of the crowd blending into a distant hum as the weight of the night settled on him. For most people, this game was just that, a game. But for Marcus, it was a microcosm of everything he fought for and everything still left to fight. The earlier misunderstanding with the security guards wasn't new, but had stirred something in him he couldn't shake. As he scanned the crowd, his eyes landed on a group of kids in the front row, wearing oversized jerseys and waving team flags. They reminded him of himself as a boy, wide-eyed and full of dreams. He couldn't help but smile, but the sight also brought a pang of sadness. Would these kids grow up to face the same struggles he had? Would the world see them for their potential, or would it judge them by their skin, their neighborhood, or their last name? His thoughts were interrupted when Sarah appeared at his side, her expression as sharp and professional as always. "I checked in with the head of security," she said, her voice low so it wouldn't carry. "They're embarrassed about what happened. They've promised to make sure it doesn't happen again." Marcus nodded, but his jaw tightened. "It shouldn't have happened in the first place," he said quietly. Sarah hesitated, her gaze softening. "I know, but Marcus, you've dealt with worse. Don't let this ruin the night." He knew she was right, but the frustration lingered. It wasn't about this one incident. It was about the pattern, the constant need to prove himself in spaces where others were simply accepted. As the game continued, Marcus decided to take a walk around the stadium. He liked to do this sometimes, to remind himself why he had invested so much into the team and the community. The corridors were buzzing with fans buying snacks and merchandise, their excitement palpable. He overheard snippets of conversations, parents explaining the rules of the game to their kids, friends debating the best players on the team. It was moments like these that made it all worthwhile. But as he rounded a corner, he overheard a very different kind of conversation. Two men in team jackets were standing near a concession stand, their voices low but laced with disdain. "I don't care how much money he's got," one of them said. "He doesn't belong here. This is our game, our team." The other man nodded, his expression hard. "Exactly. He thinks he could just buy his way in and change everything. It's not right." Marcus froze, his heart pounding. They didn't see him standing there, but their words cut deep. He had faced this kind of prejudice before, but hearing it here, in the very place he had worked so hard to transform, felt like a betrayal. He wanted to confront them, to demand they explain what gave them the right to question his place. But he knew that wouldn't change their minds. Instead, he took a deep breath and walked away, their voices echoing in his ears. Back on the field, the game was reaching its climax. The score was tied, and the tension in the stadium was electric. Marcus tried to focus on the action, but his mind kept drifting back to what he had heard. He thought about the players on the field, many of whom had come from backgrounds just as challenging as his own. They had worked tirelessly to get here, defying the odds at every turn. And yet, even with their talent and dedication, they were often reduced to stereotypes, praised for their athleticism, but dismissed as anything more. It was a reality Marcus knew all too well, and it fueled his determination to create a different narrative. As the game ticked into its final moments, Marcus's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from one of the team's star players, Andrew. "Need to talk after the game," the message read. Marcus frowned. Andrew was one of the team's most outspoken players, known for his activism off the field as much as his skills on it. If he wanted to talk, it usually meant something important. When the final whistle blew, the stadium erupted in cheers. The team had pulled off a last-minute victory, and the energy in the air was electric. Marcus clapped along with the crowd, his smile genuine but his thoughts elsewhere. He made his way to the locker room, where the players were celebrating. Andrew spotted him immediately and walked over, his expression serious. "Great game," Marcus said, tapping him on the shoulder. Andrew nodded but didn't return the smile. "Can we talk?" They found a quiet corner, away from the noise. Andrew hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Look, I love this team. I love what you've done for us, for the community. But there's something we need to address." Marcus's heart sank. "What is it?" Andrew glanced around, making sure no one was listening. "Some of the guys are hearing things, whispers from the staff, people questioning your leadership, your decisions. It's not everyone, but it's enough that it's starting to affect the locker room." Marcus felt a wave of frustration and sadness. He had poured everything into this team, not just his money but his heart and soul. And yet, there were still people who couldn't see past their own biases. "Thanks for telling me," he said finally. "I'll handle it." Andrew nodded, his respect for Marcus clear. "I've got your back. We all do. But you need to know what's going on." As Marcus left the locker room, his mind raced. He had expected challenges when he bought the team, but he hadn't anticipated how deeply ingrained some of those challenges would be. Walking back out into the now empty stadium, he looked around at the field, the stands, the lights that were beginning to dim. This place was supposed to be a symbol of unity, of possibility. But tonight had shown him that the fight for change was far from over. Marcus knew he couldn't fix everything overnight, but he also knew he wouldn't back down. This was bigger than him, bigger than football. It was about proving that the barriers people tried to put up were nothing compared to the power of determination and vision. As he stood there, the cool night air settling around him, Marcus made a silent vow. No matter how hard the road ahead, he would keep pushing forward. For the team, for the community, and for every kid in the stands who dared to dream. As the days passed, Marcus couldn't shake the weight of everything he learned. The murmurs of discontent among the staff, the tension in the locker room, and the lingering sting of those words he'd overheard, it all gnawed at him. He found himself returning to the stadium late at night, long after everyone had gone home, walking the empty hallways and sitting alone in the stands. This was supposed to be his sanctuary, a place where his hard work and sacrifices paid off. But now it felt like a battlefield. The upcoming game was critical, a championship qualifier that had the whole city buzzing. The pressure was mounting, not just for the players but for Marcus as well. A win would silence some of the critics, at least for a while. But a loss? He didn't even want to think about the backlash that would follow. Tensions reached a boiling point during a team meeting. Marcus decided to attend, hoping to address the growing unease head-on. The players sat in a semicircle, their expressions a mix of focus and frustration. Andrew was there, his usual calm demeanor replaced with visible tension. As the coach began discussing strategies, one of the assistant trainers interrupted. "With all due respect, maybe we should focus less on the game plan and more on the distractions off the field," he said, his tone sharp. The room went silent. Marcus felt every pair of eyes shift toward him, but he stayed calm. "What distractions are you referring to?" he asked, his voice steady but firm. The trainer hesitated, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to back down. "It's no secret that some people think the changes you've made, well, they're not exactly in line with the team's traditions." Marcus leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "And by traditions, you mean what, exactly?" The trainer shifted in his seat, avoiding eye contact. "I'm just saying the team's culture is Different now. Not everyone's on board with it. Before Marcus could respond, Andrew stood up. Enough, he said, his voice cutting through the tension. We're here to win games, not cling to outdated ideas about what this team should look like. If you've got a problem with that, maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here. The room erupted into murmurs, some players nodding in agreement while others exchanged uneasy glances. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude for Andrew's support, but he knew the division ran deeper than a single argument. After the meeting, Marcus pulled Andrew aside. "Thanks for stepping in," he said. Andrew nodded. "Always. But Marcus, this isn't going away on its own. You got to address it, directly and publicly. People need to hear from you." Marcus knew he was right. He'd spent so much time trying to prove himself through actions, hoping they would speak louder than words. But now it was clear that words were exactly what was needed. The night before the big game, Marcus called a press conference. The room was packed with reporters, their cameras and microphones aimed squarely at him. He could feel the weight of their expectations, but he refused to let it intimidate him. "I want to address something that's been on my mind," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "When I bought this team, I did it because I believed in its potential, not just as a group of players, but as a symbol for this city, this community. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew there would be people who doubted me, who didn't think I belonged here. But I also knew that change doesn't happen by staying silent or staying comfortable." He paused, letting his words sink in. The room was so quiet, he could hear the faint hum of the cameras recording. "I've heard the whispers," he continued. "I've seen the looks. And I want to make one thing clear. This team belongs to everyone. It belongs to the players who give their all on the field, to the fans who cheer from the stands, and to every kid out there who dreams of being part of something bigger than themselves. If that makes some people uncomfortable, then so be it, because progress doesn't wait for comfort." The applause started slow, hesitant, but it grew until it filled the room. Marcus felt a mix of relief and resolve. He had spoken his truth, and now it was up to others to decide how they would respond. The day the game arrived, and the energy in the stadium was palpable. Fans packed the stands, their cheers echoing through the air. But behind the scenes, the tension was thicker than ever. Marcus could feel it as he made his way to the owner's box, passing staff members who avoided his gaze and players who seemed more focused on the off-field drama than the game ahead. As the first half unfolded, it became clear that the team was struggling. Missed passes, sloppy defense, and a lack of coordination had them trailing by several points. The crowd was restless, and Marcus could feel the weight of their disappointment. During halftime, he went down to the locker room, where the players were gathered in silence. The usual energy and determination were absent, replaced by a sense of defeat. Marcus stepped forward, his voice firm but compassionate. "I'm not here to give a pep talk," he said. "You all know what you're capable of. You've shown it time and time again. But right now, you're letting the noise get to you. You're letting other people's doubts and opinions decide how you play. That's not who we are." He looked around the room, meeting each player's gaze. "We've faced challenges before, and we've overcome them. Not because it was easy, but because we refused to give up. So ask yourselves, are you going to let them win? Or are you going to prove them wrong?" The players exchanged glances, a spark of determination beginning to light in their eyes. Andrew stood up, nodding at Marcus. "Let's show them who we are," he said, his voice steady and confident. As the second half began, the team returned to the field with a renewed sense of purpose. The crowd, sensing the shift, erupted into cheers. Marcus watched from the owner's box, his heart pounding as the tension built with every play. The stakes had never been higher, and the outcome was far from certain. But for the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. The energy in the stadium was electric as the team fought their way back into the game. Every pass, every tackle was met with a roar from the crowd, the momentum shifting with each play. Marcus stood in the owner's box, his eyes locked on the field. For the first time that day, a sliver of optimism crept into his chest. The team was playing like the champions he knew they could be, and the crowd was fully behind them. But just as the tide seemed to be turning, something happened that no one could have anticipated. During a pivotal play, the referee blew the whistle, halting the game. Confusion rippled through the players and fans as the officials gathered on the field, their faces grim. A voice crackled over the stadium's speakers, announcing a delay due to an incident requiring immediate review. Marcus's heart sank. He glanced at Andre, who was pacing the sideline, visibly frustrated. "What now?" he muttered under his breath. As the minutes dragged on, the buzz of the crowd turned into restless murmurs. Marcus's phone buzzed, and when he glanced at the screen, his stomach twisted. It was a message from the head of stadium operations. "You need to come down here. Now." Marcus wasted no time. He left the owner's box, his mind racing as he made his way to the operations hub. When he arrived, he was greeted by a flurry of activity. Security personnel were huddled around a monitor, their expressions tense. "What's going on?" Marcus demanded. One of the security leads turned to him, his face pale. "There's been an allegation against one of the players. A fan claims they overheard something inappropriate." He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "It's racially charged." Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. "What?" "We're reviewing footage now," the security lead continued, "but the fan is insistent. They're claiming they heard one of our players use a slur against an opposing player." Marcus' mind raced. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not when the team was finally finding its stride. "Who's the player?" The security lead hesitated. "It's Andra." Marcus felt his chest tighten. Andra, the same man who had stood by him through every challenge, who had been a leader both on and off the field. It didn't make sense. "I need to talk to him," Marcus said, his voice firm. By the time Marcus reached the locker room, Andra was already there, sitting on the bench with his head in his hands. The tension in the room was suffocating, the other players avoiding eye contact as Marcus approached. "Andra," Marcus began, his voice steady, "tell me what happened." Andra looked up, his eyes filled with frustration and hurt. "I didn't say anything, Marcus. You know me. You think I'd throw everything away like that?" "I believe you," Marcus said without hesitation. "But we need to address this now. The officials are reviewing the situation, and the fans are already speculating. If we don't get ahead of this, it could spiral out of control." Andrew nodded, his jaw tight. "Do what you have to do. I'm not hiding from this." Marcus felt a surge of respect for Andrew's composure, but he knew the situation was far from resolved. He stepped out of the locker room and called a meeting with the team's legal advisor and PR manager. "We need to handle this carefully," the PR manager said, her tone urgent. "If we release a statement denying the claim without proof, it could backfire. But if we stay silent, the narrative will take on a life of its own." Marcus rubbed his temples, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "What's the status of the review?" "The footage is inconclusive," the legal advisor said. "We can't hear anything clearly, and the alleged incident happened outside the range of the cameras." Marcus' frustration boiled over. "So, we had nothing. No evidence, no way to prove or disprove this claim." The room fell silent, and Marcus realized the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about Andra. It was about the team's reputation, his reputation, and everything they'd worked for. As the game resumed, the tension in the stadium was palpable. The players were visibly distracted, their focus slipping as the controversy loomed over them. The opposing team capitalized on their hesitation, scoring 2 quick goals that left the crowd stunned. Marcus watched helplessly from the sidelines, his mind racing. He couldn't let this derail everything. But just as he was about to step away to regroup, his phone buzzed again. It was a message from an anonymous number. "I have proof Andra didn't say anything. Meet me under section 112. Marcus stared at the message, his heart pounding. This could be the break they needed, or it could be a trap. But he knew he didn't have a choice. Taking a deep breath, he made his way to the designated section, every step filled with uncertainty. When he arrived, a figure stepped out of the shadows, a young woman clutching a phone. "You don't know me," she said, her voice trembling. "But I was sitting near the fan who made the accusation. I recorded everything." Marcus' breath caught, and the woman handed him the phone. "Listen for yourself." As Marcus played the recording, his heart raced. The audio wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. The fan's voice was unmistakable. "If we can't beat them on the field, we'll ruin them off it. Watch this." Marcus's hands trembled as he paused the recording. Relief and anger warred within him. He had the proof he needed to clear Andra's name, but the fact that someone would stoop so low to sabotage them was infuriating. He turned to the woman, his voice steady. "Thank you, you don't know how much this means." But as he hurried back to the operations hub, another thought struck him, a chilling realization. If someone was willing to go to such lengths to target Andra, what else were they capable of? And who might be their next target? The stakes had never been higher, and Marcus knew the fight was far from over. Marcus burst back into the operations hub, the phone gripped tightly in his hand. The room was still tense, the security team and legal advisors huddled around monitors, searching for any angle to defuse the situation. Without a word, Marcus played the audio recording aloud. The room fell silent as the damning words from the accuser echoed through the air, their malicious intent now undeniable. The security lead exhaled sharply. "This changes everything," he said, his voice laced with a mix of relief and anger. "We need to get this to the officials immediately." Marcus didn't waste a second. He handed the phone to the legal advisor, who promised to submit the evidence to the league and the officiating team for immediate review. But even as the gears began to turn, Marcus knew the damage had already been done. Andrew's name had been dragged through the mud, and the team's momentum had been shattered. He made his way back to the locker room, where Andrew was still sitting, his head bowed. The air was thick with tension, the other players exchanging worried glances. When Marcus entered, all eyes turned to him. "Andrew," Marcus began, his voice steady but urgent. "We have proof. The accusation was a setup. You're cleared." Andrew's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a mix of relief and disbelief. "Are you serious?" Marcus nodded. "I'll explain everything later, but right now we need you back on that field. The team needs you." Andrew stood, his shoulders straightening as a spark of determination returned to his eyes. "Let's finish this," he said, his voice resolute. When Andrew stepped back onto the field, the stadium erupted in a mix of cheers and murmurs. The tension was still palpable, but the sight of their captain rejoining the game reignited a flicker of hope among the fans. The game resumed with renewed intensity, the team channeling their frustration and anger into every play. Andrew led the charge, his presence on the field a force of nature. Within minutes, the team scored, narrowing the gap and sending the crowd into a frenzy. But the final moments of the game were nothing short of a nail-biter. With mere seconds left on the clock, the team was down by 1 point. Andrew, with the ball in his hands, made a daring play that left everyone on the edge of their seats. He dodged 2 defenders, leaped into the air, and threw a perfect pass to a teammate in the end zone. The crowd held its breath as the ball sailed through the air, time seeming to slow. When it landed safely in his teammate's hands, the stadium erupted in a deafening roar. The team had won. The players celebrated on the field, their joy a stark contrast to the tension that had gripped them earlier. Marcus watched from the sideline, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. But even in the midst of the victory, he couldn't shake the lingering unease. As the team filed back into the locker room, Marcus was approached by the young woman who had provided the recording. She looked nervous but determined. "There's something else you need to know," she said quietly. "I overheard the same fan talking on the phone after the game. They mentioned someone by name, a board member." Marcus froze. "A board member?" She nodded. "I don't know who they were talking to, but they said something about making sure this doesn't happen again." Marcus's mind raced. If someone on the board was involved in the setup, it meant this wasn't just a random act of sabotage. It was calculated, deliberate, and personal. The victory on the field felt bittersweet as Marcus realized the battle was far from over. The shadows of betrayal loomed larger than ever, and the fight to protect his team and his legacy was just beginning.